Parashas Miketz opens up with the entire events of the dreams of Paro, Yosef being called to interpret the dreams. And what's interesting to note is the way that Paro knew about Yosef was because of the events that happened at the very end of last week's Parsha, in Parashas Vayeshev, where the butler and the baker are thrown into prison, and Yosef interprets their dreams correctly, and from that event came the salvation of Yosef. The very last pasuk tells us something interesting, though, in Vayeshev. It says, "V'lo zocha sar mashkim es Yosef vayishkachehu." The Sar Mashkim did not remember Yosef, and he forgot him. Rashi explains to us actually a very important lesson from there. Rashi explains that Yosef asked the Sar Mashkim, "You're now going to be returned to your position. You're now going to be in the house of Paro. Please remember me to Paro," meaning please intercede on my behalf so that Paro will free me because I am improperly imprisoned. Because of this, Rashi explains, Yosef was punished and he had to spend an additional 2 years in prison. Rashi says very clearly the reason is because Asher Agev Asher Sam Hashem Iftacho. Praise be the young man who places Hashem as a source in whom he trusts. Lo pana ravayim, and he doesn't turn to those which are empty, which cannot offer any salvation. Who does this refer to? This refers to the Mitzrayim, to the Egyptians, who are comparable to these empty things that can't offer salvation. Now, the problem with that Rashi, and that in fact Medrash, is a very simple one. What Yosef did seems to be a rather appropriate hishtadlus. We are obligated to act in the way of the world. Yosef was in trouble. He was in prison now for 10 years. He was involved with a major situation with the Sar Mashke. He basically saved the Sar Mashke a tremendous amount of pain, and the Sar Mashke was likely to have a good sense of appreciation for Yosef. So Yosef did what we would consider a normal, regular shtadlus. He asked the Sar Mashke, "Please remember me. When you go to Paro, please intercede on my behalf." That doesn't seem to be anything that violates a lack of betochen. It doesn't seem to be an inappropriate activity. Quite the opposite. It sounds like it is an appropriate, proper ishtadlus, yet Yosef is punished for it, and the question is why? And I believe the answer is exactly deduced from the words of Rashi. The problem is not so much that Yosef did something in the realm of ishtadlus, not that he attempted to do something to save himself, but rather whom he asked to intercede on his behalf. He asked a Mitzri. An Egyptian is someone who's considered not reliable. An Egyptian is somebody who you normally wouldn't place your faith in, you wouldn't invest your time and energy in, because he's not going to answer up to what he's promised anyway. He's not reliable. Yet Yosef relied on somebody who normally isn't reliable, and that demonstrates something. That demonstrates that Yosef had a level of desperation in him. Why did he rely on somebody who wasn't quite a 100% reliable individual? Because there was some element of need, of desperation. Yosef felt that he was in big trouble. And I think there's a tremendous lesson to learn from that. And that is that if a person has a very strong, powerful sense of bitachon, there is no concept of desperation. There is hishtadlus, there are attempts, there are efforts, there are things that I do because, after all, there is something that Hashem wants us to do called act within the normal way of the world. But any time I feel desperate, anytime I feel like I'm in deep and dire straits, that demonstrates that it's a lack of bitachon. Yosef, in fact, did something that somehow, on his level, lacked bitachon. For you and I, maybe it would have been an appropriate hishtadlus, an appropriate effort, but on his tremendous level of bitachon, this should have been an action just like any other action. The fact that he's been in prison for 10 years should not mitigate, should not change his behavior. Since under normal circumstances he never would trust the Mitzri, the fact that he trusts the Mitzri under these circumstances shows that he feels a sense of desperation and he feels there's something lacking in his bitachon. And I think this concept has a very important lesson to us. And that lesson is we are supposed to be very actively engaged in ishtadlus. We're supposed to go about this world as if our actions will directly change the events of this world. We're also supposed to know that Hashem is completely, totally involved in every single activity. One of the litmus tests, one of the clear indicators whether a person has real bitachon or not, is that sense of I'm in trouble, of desperation, of there's no salvation for me here. When a person feels that, clearly that's not an appropriate ishtadlus, that's the opposite, that's a lack of bitachon. When a person fully understands that Hashem is totally involved, there's no desperation, there's only strong attempts, and again, that's apparently the level that Yosef stepped over on his madrega. Much hatzlacha.